All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Weight She Carries podcast. I have a wonderful guest with me today. Her name is Loyiso Lindani. And I am so grateful to speak with you, Lindani. And we're gonna get into your story. Yes, you're holding up your book. We're gonna get into your book. You're an author. You're a journalist. You're a lot of different things. And I'm excited because the way that this interview happened is that one of our writers named Kim Mukwa reached out to you for your story,
Yeah.
and when she approached me with it, she said, I've come across this woman who's written this book called How HIV Saved My Life. And, can we interview her for a story?" And I said, yeah, that is such a catchy title. Like it's not what you would normally think of when you think of
Yeah.
HIV, right? Because we have all of the stigma and all these things that we've been told about it. But you say HIV saved your life. So we'll get into that. But for now, welcome, Loyiso. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very well. I'm in a happy, healthy space mentally. I feel good about life. I feel good about myself. Yeah, and I'm happy. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy for this opportunity. I'm just as inspired as the people that are going to be like watching this interview. I'm also just inspired to be in such spaces. Because never ever did I dream that it would happen. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome that you avail yourself, right? Because it's one thing to kind of have a private battle that you are dealing with and going through that journey. Because as people will find out, you have a very layered story. Like your childhood and
Yeah.
things that happened in your teen years, you've been through some stuff. But then, so to be able to go through that and then kind of be at a point where, I'm going to share that in a book, that's got to be a huge journey in and of itself.
Yeah, it was like obviously when I was growing up, I never knew that I would actually turn my life into a book ever, and it just came to me as a revelation, I think, in 2018 because I started it in 2016. I started writing the book in 2016, and then I left it, and then because a lot of things happened, which I talk about in the book, and then I completed it from 2018 until 2019, I think. Yeah, so it took me like that long to put everything into context, and I did it mostly as part of study work, as part of therapy for myself to heal myself and to be accountable, to introspect and look at my patterns, my behavioral patterns, the toxic traits and negative things, repetitive cycles that I was doing to try and like become the better version of myself, if you may put it like that. So it wasn't like something that was easy. I didn't like wake up. I didn't also have the resources to do it. So it was very, very challenging to put it all like together. And because of like the traumatic past events, it was also just very, very difficult to just look at everything with honesty and not feel any pain. So I was going through a lot of pain when I was writing. It was very painful because I had to look at a lot of my trauma and write it in the most honest and possible way that I could. So yeah, I'm very happy to have managed to do that.
Yeah, and when you're writing, especially about traumatic events, you have to go back and relive those moments.
Yes, it was hard. It was hard because a lot of the stuff I really didn't want to remember. I really, sometimes some things happen to you and you choose just to forget about it, just to be able to have some kind of life and to be able to move on or forward with your own life. So you choose just to be like, okay, let me just put that somewhere in the forgotten box of my memory. So I had to go back to those archives and remember everything. And most of it wasn't fun to remember. So I lived on painkillers a lot during that time because I had a lot of headaches.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's kind of bring the viewers into that story
Yeah.
of your childhood. And before we do that, let's kind of lay the foundation by talking about you as a person now. Like one thing that you and I have in journalism, we were talking before we started reporting that we're both have experience in journalism.
Yeah.
And we both, love to write. You obviously have written a book. I'm a writer as well. So we have some commonality. So tell us in your own words, how would you describe yourself?
Um, I would say extremely introverted. I'm an introvert. I love
Oh
art.
my goodness, we have that in common too. I'm an introvert.
I'm an introvert. I love art. I love jazz. I love quiet spaces. I love peace. Um, I don't do small talk very well. About me, I'm a mother. I'm a mother to a beautiful, beautiful. My child is my life. He's the reason
Oh,
for my existence. Um, I live with anxiety. Like I'm talking about it now through therapy, anxiety and depression and all those negative feelings that come with being a trauma survivor. And I love life. I love life. I love beautiful things. I would say I mostly like my own space. I like being by myself. I can have conversations with me all the time. I can literally write about anything and everything. And I have a beautiful heart. I have a soft heart, which a lot of people tend to think that uh, is an opportunity to manipulate me, and the adverse of that. It's like,
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, I'm a person who's constantly working on themselves. I'm passionate about mental health. I'm passionate about sexual and reproductive health rights, and being supportive to people living with HIV. Mostly, I think that about sums me up.
Okay, okay. Well, it's so interesting because I am an introvert as well. And
Awesome.
oftentimes, yeah, like a couple of my friends are like, there's no way you're not an introvert because, I mean, when I need to, like I come out of my shell when I need to, but it's exhausting. Like
Yeah, very,
it's
very.
exhausting. And
For
then I
me, it
need to
takes
like
like a
retreat.
preparedness. You have to be prepared, like
Yes.
aligned with yourself mentally, physically, spiritually as well. I mean, then like now I am prepared for it. Then it's happening that we having a conversation. Fortunately, we are aligned in the sense that we have things that are in common and our energies are at the same level. And then after this interview, I'll go back to my quiet shell and then I'll just be like quietly me scribbling something, writing or listening to music or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And I love to meet other writers because I think there's something about us that's so strange that other people don't understand. I know for myself, there are times when I've written fiction and it's like
Yeah.
you go into this your the imagination is so powerful. You go into this alternate world, so to speak, and you're
Mm.
writing and you're just creating all these different characters or creating these scenarios and it feels so real. And I remember sometimes I would get so attached to my characters that if my character was going through something, my character had a bad day, let's say, I would then feel it myself.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
know
just
that
it's a
feeling.
strange thing.
I know that feeling, and not a lot of people would understand it. So for me, it's like a very sacred part of me, and I choose like to honor it as much as is possible. And doing this is also part of doing that. A lot of me started with the poetry for me. For me, a lot of it started with the poetry. I was performing as the poet named Misunderstood. So that name came about. Now I'm realizing as I'm working out things in context that the name came about because I felt misunderstood by the world, by society, by my family. And I felt like people only understood me once I would share like my poems, and then they would like get to have an understanding of me because as a creative person, I wasn't allowed to be creative. I wasn't given the freedom to be myself. I was directed into who I'm meant to be, and I could never fit into whatever the narrative that was scripted for me, especially by my family, because now I'm comfortable enough to talk about it. Because for a lot of the time, I didn't want to talk about it because I also wanted to have a normal family like everybody else. I wanted to have a loving story to share. I wanted to have happy more memories to talk about, but I didn't have those. I don't have any of those. So the misunderstood poet came about, and I started in the Eastern Cape province, and then I moved to Johannesburg, and I did more of the same performances, and I would host. I hosted Freedom Mondays at the African Freedom Station. I think they've closed it down now, but a lot of poets and artists, basically, what the environment for Freedom Mondays was, it was to create an opportunity for all the creatives to come. So if you had read something, you could share about it on the mic. If you had like whatever day you had, you could come talk about it. If you had a poem, if you had a song, if you had a melody, you had a drum, you had guitar. So we had all these creatives coming together on Mondays, and everybody would just unplug, and then we would share stories and poems and songs, and it would be like really very amazing. So I grew from that, and I grew from that. I still have a lot of poems, and I intend to publish my poems, but I'm just still also focused on the autobiography a lot, because the entire message is within the autobiography. And beyond just HIV, there's a lot of stories within that. There's the gender-based violence that I experienced, and being with an abusive partner, and experiencing rape with a boyfriend, and coming from a narcissistic family, being abused, growing up in all the different toxic relationships that I experienced. I feel like even people who do not have HIV negative people would relate to the story somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the beauty of it is when you have a story, like you said, other people can relate to it. They may not have the same experience. Their situation may be different. It may not be HIV for them. It could be maybe another condition that they're dealing with, but what they can relate to is certain parts of your story. And when it
Yeah.
comes to gender-based violence, like that it's so underreported, unfortunately. And I think more people have experienced it than we would like to acknowledge. I think many people have family members who've dealt with it, and people have someone they know. If it's not themselves, it's someone they know. And so people like yourself speaking out and talking about it really gives others the courage to be able to open up and tell their own stories. So let's go back to that part, because you talked about your family. You talked about how you kind of had that struggle where they had this path that they wanted you to follow, and that just wasn't who you are. And I think sometimes within the context of African families, they're a handful of professions that are approved. Like there's the doctor, there's the lawyer, there's the engineer, there's the teacher. And so and if you want to do something different, like, I mean, writing or the arts, for myself, I wish I had known that writing was an option. I enjoyed writing from the time when I was young, but I just didn't know that it was an option for me career wise. And so I went and I did a whole degree in something else, in computer information systems for my university. And then it's only later on now, when I was in my about early 30s, is now when I said, what am I doing in computers? I'm not using this degree at
This
all.
is not
Let me follow what
me.
I really like. So
Yeah.
let's talk about your upbringing.
It was mostly okay, in the sense that I did enjoy my childhood like other kids. I played, I ran, I played games. I was in the street, girls and boys chasing, playing hide and seek, running, hopscotch, all the games, climbing up the tree. My great grandmother used to hate that. I was raised by my great grandmother, technically, because when I look at my childhood memories, she's a big part of my childhood memories. She loved me to infinity, and I'm so grateful. to be able to say I was raised by a woman born in 1916. So I have a lot
Wow.
of that. Yeah, I have a lot of that with me, and I used to love climbing trees along with my friends in the neighborhood because we played with boys. So we climbed trees, and she really did not like that. I still remember some of those memories, but a lot of it also was tragic. I grew up in a violent home. Uh, there was a lot of like toxic energy, a lot of narcissism, a lot of abuse, a lot of violence, a lot of fights, broken windows, police officers coming in to calm the situation. But I normalized this. I normalized this because if it wasn't happening in my home, it was happening in the neighbor's home. Like it was just a part of like our community. So I thought it was like normal to have to watch your mother and her siblings wielding knives at each other, trying to stab each other, things like being
Oh,
thrown, tables being shoved, police coming to break it down. That was my normal childhood. That's how I grew up, and I internalized all of this because this was the community that I grew up in. If I wasn't seeing that violence at home, I was definitely seeing it on the streets where I was playing in with the boys. See like the brothers stabbing each other, they're drunk coming from the tavern, that kind of life. It became normal for me. And it's only in adulthood that I learned that no, actually, nothing about how I grew up was normal. A lot of it was internalized trauma and stigma that was coming in the society that I grew up in. And I'm now an outcast for talking about it because they're not celebrating me because they feel like I am shaming them because the story that I'm supposed to have come out with was how great and loving and supported I was, and how, despite everything, they really love me. They just had trouble showing me how much they really love me, and not talk about how toxic and narcissistic everything was and everybody was. I mean, how do I come from one of the biggest townships in South Africa and then not glorify that and talk about the violence that happens there and talk about the trauma that we experience there as Black women, especially, and I didn't know these dynamics. I didn't have the language. I didn't know that I was experiencing trauma. I didn't know that being a Black girl was significant. I was just like another girl, growing up in a township and not really being conscious of what it means to be a Black woman in society, and then also a Black woman living with HIV. You see, so I didn't have the language for that. I didn't have the mental to process it all. I didn't have any of that. So everything was just normalized, and it's only when now I experience the world globally, because now we're connected through the internet now and we have access,
yeah.
and therefore you can always empower yourself, and then you get all of this knowledge, and then you like learn, oh wow, oh my gosh, I experienced trauma. I experienced things that are not normal, and I've adapted things that are toxic that I need to uproot within myself. And uprooting all these things is not going to be like the easiest thing ever because, oh my gosh, I am lacking in resources, I'm lacking in funds to do this, and I'm finding myself in the middle of this soup of now having to break generational curses. And it's such a buzzword now that everybody's talking about on online, but nobody really talks about how painful it is to break generational curses, because you are talking about your entire history, you're talking about lineage, you're talking about centuries possibly of narcissism, of like abuse, of trauma, of healing that still needs to be happening. This is you trying to heal your entire bloodline, a bloodline that may feel it doesn't need to be fixed, a bloodline that may feel that things are perfect the way that they are. So now you find yourself on the opposite end of the spectrum, and you're isolated there, and you kind of like also feeling like somewhere like your mental health is affected because you keep crying out for help and it's like nobody hears you, and you have to like swim and swim and swim, and you're hoping to live long enough to get to the shore and create a better generation from the same bloodline. So healing the past traumas is not something that is easy to do, especially if you are a black person, I want to say, because as most of us are coming from poverty backgrounds, so to not even have the financial means to do all of this, it means that you're going to be outcasted by your family, by your friends, and possibly even your spouse. If you're married or if you have a loving relationship, things might turn sour because now you are going through this transition, and sometimes you might also feel like things are not okay in the head because you're just like mind blown by everything, and you're like trying to make sense of everything, and it takes time to process all of these things. Like it's like this big jigsaw puzzle, and you're trying to put all the pieces together, and sometimes they come through immediately, and sometimes it can take months, and sometimes can go up to even over a year of you trying to fix these things. So I've been through that, and for me, I did not have support. I supported myself through research and learning and equipping myself with all the knowledge that I could find so that I could be able to make sense of the things that were happening to me, because I was badly ostracized, for doing a lot of the things that I was doing and healing myself and breaking the generational curses. So as it stands, I don't have a family because in November last year, we went and signed a protection order. I signed a protection order against my family because they were making death threats against me
Oh my
for
goodness.
speaking out. Yes, I haven't spoken about it on social media so much because I didn't want this huge fanfare of gossip, and because also at the time we hadn't yet gone to court because they were making death threats against me about speaking out about what happened. They were saying that I'm a liar and I'm looking for publicity with their names. I'm dragging their name. They're embarrassed. They're hoping that I could change my surname because I'm dragging their family name through the mud. They're not proud of me. And if I don't stop doing what I'm doing, bad things are going to happen to me. So I then ended up involving the police, and the police were like, with situations like this, you have to go to the court, and the court has to grant you a protection order. So I went to the court, and it was a traumatic experience because I was alone in doing all of this. I was alone by myself. So I went to the courts and I applied, and it obviously took time. And it's traumatic because when you get a court order, like when they give you, when you apply for a court order, for a court protection order, you get that form, and then you have to go to police. You have to go with police to these people whom you are saying you need protection from. So that was traumatic because they were there and they were jeering and they were like cursing and laughing and like making all this noise. Like, but in the end, we had a court date, and we went to court. We went to court twice. The first time, because I was also new, I didn't know what was expected of me at court. I didn't know anything because I was alone in all of this. So I went there, and they had lawyer. They had a lawyer. So the magistrate was like, "We can't proceed because you don't have a lawyer. So you need to go get a lawyer." So I had to go and find myself a lawyer. I was so very blessed because I was able to get a lawyer within that specific time frame that they had given me in court. And then when we went there, the lawyer and my lawyer and their lawyer discussed everything, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna grant you this, but these are the conditions." And one of the conditions was that we must never ever contact each other ever again. So I now live with that. So it's not really been like the most pleasant, it's been a whole lot of like hurt and pain, because who doesn't want to have a family? I wish they were supportive. I wish they were loving. I wish they could have taken this opportunity to reflect, to see how their actions influenced me, and also be proud of how I was taking responsibility for my actions in all of the mess and everything that happened in my life. But it didn't work out quite that way.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that because
It's okay.
it's heartbreaking to hear that, it got to that point where, it's one thing for you not to feel supported by your family, and it's a whole nother ball game for them to be actually threatening you. and coming out with that kind of backlash from your family. And what you're doing is you are trying to turn things in a positive direction so that your family is no longer, you're trying to break those generational curses. And you have a son whom you're trying to make his experience different from what you went through. And to have to go through that, I can't imagine. You're such a strong woman to be able
It's
to
been
to
hard. It's been
essentially do
very,
that
very
on your own.
painful. It's been very painful. I've done a lot of things on my own since childhood, and I'm working it out now in my own way with therapy as well, and to try and let go of the trauma, to recognize my triggers, to recognize my triggers as to be aware of them, confront them, and overcome them as well. So this is a daily thing. And also now I'm learning about the impact of trauma on my body, and now I'm
Yeah.
working on a plan whereby I'm like, okay, because I've been seeing a lot of videos of like how you release trauma on the body, like to see a specialist. I'm working on giving that to myself as part of my self-care gift to myself. So I've just been like researching because I've been seeing videos. So I don't know if it actually works, but what I've been reading is that a lot of the trauma gets stored up in our bodies and it manifests in different ways. So I'm inclined to believe that because my body has also been giving me issues recently. I had surgery. I had a myomectomy, and I believe it's also like spiritually connected in a way, with the trauma that I experienced as part of the response that my body gave me, and there might be other things that I discover as I go along, and I'm doing this because now I realize that, okay, I have like the platform, I have the network or contacts or people that are like following my journey, that are experiencing similar things to me. And I've now been put in a position of being a healer or a teacher or somebody who's in a teaching or sharing position. So now when I do these things, it's no longer just about me. It's also about the network of people that are around me. So if I see a benefit of something, then obviously I get to share it with the community of people that are like following me or whatever in those platforms, to share, like, so that if I have an experience where maybe I've gone to see someone who can help me with reducing trauma from my body, then I could share about that as well. And also, to validate other people, because I wasn't validated. I was not validated at all from child. I was just existing. I was just existing. I
Mm.
was so unsure about a lot of things, my sexuality, puberty, growing up. Am I an adult or am I still a child? What's going on? Like, there was no platform to be asking those kind of things. So I'm now trying to validate other people's experiences, to say to them, I see you, I see
Yeah.
you. You matter. Your pain is valid. Like, to be not dismissive of people is very, very important, because it currently doesn't exist, especially in the Black community, because
Yeah.
many of our parents, um, we are descendants of slavery and apartheid, and a lot of things, traumatic things happened to our parents. Our parents were abused, but they would never tell us that. They went to the grave with their trauma, which they passed on and passed on and passed on and passed on. We don't know what happened to them in the places that they worked, where they had to be with white people, especially because a lot of like the slavery and apartheid was coming from white people to Black people. So we don't know what kind of horrific, horrendous things that they were exposed to that changed them forever. But now, as a coping mechanism, they came and be these evil parents that we had to suffer from, with the beatings and the curses that they've put upon our lives, that we are now trying to break. We do not know that, a lot of us, we just internalized it. When your mother was beating you, that's how your mother was showing you love. That was the understanding of it. And if you're a child, disappear as much as possible. don't exist and don't get into trouble. Find ways to not get into trouble. If you have a problem, fix it yourself or figure it out. We didn't have those kind of platforms where okay, your mama, I'm going through this, like, can you tell me how to deal with it? We didn't have those kind of platforms. So now to be undoing that, I think that's why a lot of like the black community, especially from my province, would actually see me as in a negative light, because I'm like talking about things that are known as taboo.
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't talk about these things. So now to put a spotlight on them, it's like I'm putting a spotlight on their trauma, a trauma that they would like to not acknowledge. You see, so that is like not it's not like the easiest thing to do. So by speaking about these things is to say to other people who are experiencing them that I see you. I really do see you. I know what you are going through, and I really do. I am not just patronizing people and just being like, I know what you're going through, you'll be fine. No, I know what you're going through, and I know it takes time to even get to a point of feeling like you are fine. So a lot of the time when you come to me and you still say I'm not okay, it's okay, because I know that I've been through that experience and I'm still working out a lot of it. So it's going to be a lot to unpack, you see. So for
Yeah.
me, doing that is like kind of healing our nation in a way, but one story at a time.
One story at a time. Yeah, I love that you
Yeah.
mentioned that because one of the reasons why I've been so focused on telling, African women's stories and just women of color across the world is because there's so much emotional baggage, particularly for African women. Like we don't have those outlets for emotional healing. And there's so many things
Yeah.
that happen to us. And what we're told is, just be strong, you'll be all right. And just exactly what you said is that like, we haven't been given those platforms to talk about
Yeah.
things because it's kind of like, don't tell family secrets. What happens in the families, that's our business. And don't talk about it. And so when you don't talk about it, like it manifests in other ways, and people are carrying trauma, walking around and being told, you're not the first person to go through that. Just, it's fine. Just whatever. You'll be okay. And diminishing and dismissing our experiences. And so that's why I love that you went into detail about what it's been like for you to share your story, because I think
Yeah.
people need to realize that it's not an easy thing to do. Like when you bare your soul and you tell people what you've been through, there are often things that happen behind the scenes that the reader or whoever is on the receiving end listening or reading your story, they're not aware of. Just how much of a sacrifice it is for you to just talk about what you've been through and what you are up against.
That's so very true. And also because I didn't want people feeling sorry for me. So I didn't like put a spotlight on that particularly, because I don't want people feeling sorry for me, because I don't feel sorry for myself, you know. But also I wanted it in a way whereby to share it with people to whom I felt it would have value and it would have meaning to, and not just be like sensational about it.
Yeah.
Because these days a lot of people love to trend and like be on social media for all the wrong reasons and stuff. So I didn't want
Yeah.
it to be like about that. And also because I was still processing it for myself, a lot of it, and it was very painful. It was extremely very painful. So I needed to be okay with myself first before like I shared with people. I didn't want to come to people and I'm bleeding all over the place.
Yeah.
I just wanted to come to people in a space where I've been able to handle it, and then like share it with people in a way where they gain context as well, like as a reflection, kind of like to be like, oh, really? Because I was even talking about it to this other girl. I was doing a radio interview with her as well, and I was like, I'm not afraid to talk about my challenges or things that I feel are challenging to me, be it taking ARVs or whatever. I'm not afraid to take it out there. And it's not a way of gaining sympathy from people, but it's a way of like saying, I struggle too. I'm human too. I have these challenges too. I go through these things too. So if you are going through those things, you are not alone out there. There's somebody else like you whom maybe you possibly look up to. When you look up to somebody, you're like, yo, this person also, she struggles. She's been struggling with pills, and
Yeah.
I thought I'm alone in this. Also, it's okay, so we can overcome this thing together. Therefore, then it turns into a positive thing. It's a beautiful thing now, because when you like
Yeah.
shared experiences, okay, then you look, how does this person overcome this thing so that I can also overcome it? Because now, when you put a spotlight on the darkness, it goes away. So instead of like now
Right.
sitting alone with my discomfort and being like, oh my gosh, I'm this perfect human being. If I share this thing, people are going to look at me and judge me as if like, no. For me, it's like, okay, if I feel like it's educational and it can empower somebody, then definitely I'm going to share it. um, Struggles, what's and all, because I'm human as well. I'm going through challenges, like taking ARVs. It's not a walk in the park. It's a big commitment. Equally for me, it is a big commitment, and it is a big responsibility. I don't take it lightly at all. So if I share that, then somebody else out there is like, oh, okay, so let me change my bad habits now and try and do things right, because now I see that I'm not alone in this thing, so I can correct my steps and go about it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the trauma that you experienced, because you dropped out of high school because your mom
Yeah,
was ill, and you were
yeah,
caring for her, and you actually became an orphan because you lost both your parents. Let's
yes, I
talk
did.
about that decision. You're a young girl going to school, and then you have to make the decision to care for your mom full time. What was that like?
Painful. It was very painful, because I but for me it was like the easiest decision to make. It was so 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 easy, because
And how old were you at
um,
this time?
I was 16, 17.
Okay.
16, 17, I was in those ages. And I had made that decision because one, I had failed my metric. That's number one. I had failed my metric because my mom was sick and I was in and out of hospital and I didn't have time for my books, and life was hell at home. And because there was still a lot of stigma. There's a lot more stigma on HIV than there is now. And to come like into a house and people are afraid that you're going to breathe HIV onto them, like, because then they still believe like you can't share spoons, you can't share, like if you're even in a room with a person with HIV, you're gonna get it. And they didn't call it HIV, it was called AIDS. A lot of people don't call it HIV, it's called AIDS in the street. So they won't say you have HIV, they'll say you have AIDS. That girl with AIDS, or that woman with AIDS, or something like that. But it was hectic, and also because there was no treatment. So we were seeing a lot of people were dying like flies in numbers, in large, 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 large numbers. So my mother was also the same. And to care for her, it was because I felt like if I'm at school, then there's nobody going to be there to look after her. She needed to be bathed in the morning. She needed to be fed because she was bedridden, and she needed to be like her blankets needed to be constantly washed because she was at that stage where like she was just passing urine and stool without like having control. And because we lived in a small house, our house is a four-room house. It's two bedrooms, one dining room, and one kitchen. But it's like matchbox house. And then the toilet is outside, so she
Yeah.
couldn't have she wouldn't be able to walk all the way outside to do her business. By that time, she would have already missed herself and already maybe passed out outside. So I'd have a bucket. So I needed to be around her 24/7. And I happily made that decision because I was like, I had already failed. I don't see a future of myself in school. I'd rather be here taking care of my mom looking after her until she gets well, because inside of me I also believed that she would get better, so yeah, it was hard, man. It was really very, very hard. It was a very painful time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
And
wasn't it
so,
wasn't it wasn't like the funnest times ever. It was hard.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Especially at that age, it's kind of
Yeah.
16, 17 is like you're kind of coming into your womanhood, and kind of,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, your social life at that age is kind of front stage typically.
Yeah.
And so to kind of have to withdraw from your peers and your social life to attend to your mom must have been very difficult. How did you then
Very.
transition into like what did you do after that? Like how did you get back into school? Like how were you able to kind of carve your way like in the professional world? Because now you've done so many things. You're a journalist, you're an author, you're a poet, you're all these things. So how did you get to that point?
Um, Obviously, after my mom died, I then didn't have a reason to be sitting around not doing anything. So the decision was made actually that I needed to go back to school. So I went back to school to finish my matric, and thankfully they were taking us back the failed matrics from the previous year. So I was able to go back, and I passed that year, and I went into university the next year. Oh my gosh, and things started like going downhill from there, because obviously I had not had therapy for any of the things that had happened to me, and I had a breakdown. I was using alcohol a lot of alcohol, like way too much alcohol. It started out as a weekend fun hobby, and then it started out like as a from Thursday to a Monday thing, and then it started out to be like an any day thing, like any day's Friday type of vibe. So obviously my books were like now suffering, because now alcohol was taking center stage in my life, clubbing, drinking, and I called that fun. But now later I realized that it was my mind understanding that I've been through something so traumatic that I can't reverse, the death of my mother. And now I can't cope with it. I don't know how to explain it. And the only way for me to release it was with alcohol and the loud music from the club and the dancing, so that I don't have to think about it. Then I can think about other things. It was all just like a distraction that continued on for years and years. Like, started out in my teenage years all the way to adulthood. I think maybe from like the age of 18. And I only started waking up from like the age of like 26, 26, 27. So now I'm like starting to wake up now. And so many things have happened between that age of 18 and 26 and 27. In between that, I had a child, and I'd also tested positive for HIV. And I had like done so many things to hurt myself, to feel, I don't know, to feel anything else other than the pain that I was feeling, but also not having the platform, to be realistic with myself and deal with the trauma and find healing, because there was like so much chaos. I mean, having to accept all of that and contextualize it and become the woman that I am today, or the woman that I'm becoming from here moving forward. So it took years. It took years, and this is part of like something that I always share with people, to not be so hard on themselves, because it's a journey.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be kind to yourself. It requires to be patient, and being patient is not easy all the time, because sometimes you want things to happen right now, like immediately, and sometimes they don't happen that way. So you need to be having patience for yourself, to love yourself until you get to that point where you feel like you are okay. So to understand that it's really just like a work of art, I think.
Yeah, yeah. You
Yeah,
touched on something that I would like us to go back to. You mentioned
yeah,
that at one point you were raped by a boyfriend.
yeah. Oh my gosh, that night. Um, I've written about it. Let me just see where I've written. I've written something about it. Hopefully, I find it, guys, because it's in here somewhere. That
Somewhere in
much.
there.
Oh, yeah. Um, so I said on rape, right? I said
Hmm.
on rape. Was it rape that time when he beat me so badly? He said I didn't know how to make him feel like a man. I said I wouldn't know how to make him feel like a man since I've never been a man. I am a woman, always have been, always will be. Then he slapped me. I was so shocked when my eyes came back to look at him, asking, did you just slap me? He slapped me again, this time so hard I fell on top of the bed. He got on top of me and started punching me. I tried to fight him off, but he had more strength. Somehow I ended up on the floor. He was kicking me so hard I had no air. No air to breathe, no air to scream. I curved into a small ball on the floor. He kicked and kicked. He punched and punched until I was begging for forgiveness, apologizing so he could stop. Eventually, he did stop. I crawled to the bed and lit up a smoke while he spoke. From now on, you're going to learn how to make me feel like a man. You're gonna stop with this nonsense of yours, of talking back, of walking around like you own the place. You're no queen. You're gonna cook and clean, and you're not gonna complain about being tired from working long hours. You hear me? Yes, yes, I do hear you. In lowered, teary voices, I answered. And you're gonna give me sex whenever I want to, starting now. He moved closer, removed the blankets on top of me. I was sitting up, so he pulled me by my legs until I was laying down. Violently, he took off my tights. I was wearing black tights and nothing underneath. He peeled off his pants, laying there, half crying and half trembling. I could see his pointy, rock hard penis looking at me, but no was stuck in my throat. I was afraid of saying no, fearing I'd get beaten up some more. Besides, I thought I was no virgin. He wasn't going to do anything new. I could just lay there and be quiet. So that is what I did. And he forced my legs open. I lay there as he penetrated me. I lay there. I tried not to cry. I just looked away, trying to remind myself of the times I thought we were making love. I'd enjoyed it then when I thought it was love. I lay there, counting seconds that turned into long minutes, minutes that seemed like hours, until he was done, his ugly sperm inside me, him heaving a sigh of relief on top of me. He was done. I never held him. I never moaned. I looked away and kept breathing until he was done. I turned to the side while he cleaned himself up with a towel and bought a towel I bought with my money. From now on, you're going to do exactly as I tell you. You're going to be my woman. You're going to stop this nonsense of a revolutionary woman. You're going to cook and clean and learn how to make me feel like a man. He threw the towel on top of me. I wiped away his ugly sperm. He got into bed and lay next to me, lit up a smoke, asked if I wanted to join him. I said no. No, I don't want to smoke. Careful not to make him angry. Well, suit yourself. After which he fell asleep, leaving me with my own thoughts, asking myself, did he just rape me? Was I raped? So now I can add rape to abuse, abused me, emotionally abused, psychologically abused, physically abused. I is now sexually abused, or rather raped. Raped by my boyfriend, raped for working long hours, raped for being too tired to cook, raped for having a job when he didn't, raped for being too tired to have sex, raped for being too much of a woman, raped for being a revolutionary woman, raped for not knowing how to make him feel like a man, raped to teach me a lesson. My body was too sore for me to cry, so tears just escaped my eyes and hid themselves in my pillow, leaving me with the question, did he just hit me? Did he just kick me? Is it my body that is sore? Did he really just rape me? As I dozed off to sleep, the answer was a very distinct yes.
Whew.
So
That's
it
great.
happened. It happened to me when I least expected it, with someone whom I thought loved me, and it was hard to contextualize because we were lovers at the time. And when he suddenly became abusive towards me, I was very, very shocked by his actions, because I had loved him as much as I thought was possible to love somebody,
Mm.
and it still wasn't enough, and he still wanted me to dig deeper, and I didn't know how to dig deeper, or what I needed to do to show or prove my love. So that happened, and yeah, and life moved on, and I didn't talk about it, and I talk about in the book as well how I did not press charges, and because somebody asked me, why didn't you press charges, why didn't you have him arrested, you know and I felt, for me, and many other women might not agree with me on this one, and it is completely okay for them not to agree with me, because sexual violence is a very serious crime. So it's fine if they don't agree with me on this one. I completely accept whatever they might feel, because we are all very different. But for me, it was having to see him, I think about a year or two after the incident, and life had hit him so, so hard. He looked, or still looks like, in South Africa, we call them hobos. And that's a slang term
Mm.
for people who live in the streets, who don't take care of themselves. Those people who carry blankets. He looked very much like that. He's got missing teeth. So you could see
Wow.
life has been hard, and he's got scars on his face because he got stabbed a couple of times. So for me, it felt like justice to me. It felt like life had justified me. Life, for me, it felt like justice, because he had now become a lesser version of the person or the man that I knew and come to love. Because when you see him now, you would be like so shocked, like, God, how did you hook up with such a guy? But when we were together, he used to be beautiful. And when I saw him, he was so pathetic, man. He looked so pathetic. And we met in the street. We didn't know whether to greet each other. 'Cause I didn't know if I should greet him or what. But I just looked at him, and I felt so sorry for him, because I felt like he had gone through like so many life challenges, like so many things, bad things had happened to him, and I'm not a person who wishes bad on other people. That's another thing about me. I'm not a person who wishes bad. Like, for me, if you do wrong by me, I will cut you off, girl. I will cut you off, and I will move on from you, from that situation so fast. So,
Lost you
yeah,
there
sorry,
for a
I think,
second.
yeah, sorry, I got cut
A
off. So
network.
for
That's okay.
me,
That's
yeah,
okay.
for me, that was my justice, to see him in that state. I know it sounds bad to say it, because how are you justified seeing a person in a broken down state? But because of the way that he had violated me,
Yeah.
unnecessarily so, I felt justified, and I wrote about it in the book. And I support women to press charges. I support women to speak out against their abusers, their rapists, and I support that. However, I also recognize that our approaches to it is different, and all must be respected. I feel people might feel differently, but all might must be respected, because we aren't all going to do a thing in the same way, and
Yeah.
yeah, that was the experience, and I wrote about it, because also to write about it, I needed to affirm myself. I needed to affirm myself, that this really actually happened to me, because it's traumatic to be going to courts and having to relive, because now remember, I didn't go to court immediately. I didn't take the thing to court, and now there's no specimen that will prove
Mm.
that there was this, and then I have to relive the experience, and then it has to be a whole thing that I wasn't in the space having the capacity to handle. So for me, this was my way of validating myself and my experiences, and also to say to other women who have had the same experience of being abused by their boyfriends, raped by their boyfriends, to say, I see you, I affirm you, and you also, like me, might have chosen to not go the legal route for your own reasons. I respect that, but it's a trauma that one has to ultimately get therapy for and work it out, because it can manifest itself in many different ways as you try and move on and have relationships. You might even get married, and then it might come through during intercourse
Yeah.
with your husband. So we really need platforms to talk about it more.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for walking us through that painful period in your life. Now, you coming from, you know, your upbringing and being in a family that and having these toxic experiences, was that something that was a common thread when it came to your own romantic relationships?
Yeah, in my relationships, yes, it was, but even then I didn't have the words for it. I didn't, because a lot of the relationships were toxic. A lot of them were toxic. A lot of them were very toxic. I shouldn't have been in a lot of the relationships that I was in, but I was in because I was escaping my reality, because home was also a very toxic space. So to get relief, I then got into these relationships, and because I was vulnerable and I didn't know that I am vulnerable, obviously the men could pick it up that I am vulnerable, and then they would manipulate that. And then I didn't have a platform to even talk about that, you see. So it happened quite a lot. In like 90%, I would say, 90% of my relationships were relationships that I really had no business being in. There were relationships where I was manipulated, I was abused, I was hurt a lot, because I've always been a good person, but I didn't know that I was a good person, you see, because being a good person wasn't something that was celebrated where I was coming from. So
Mm.
to mask that, I then created a personality, if you want to say, that was more outdoorsy, outgoing, loud, everything that was conscious to me, to not be this gentle soul that I am, and to try and fit into somewhere, because I clearly didn't fit into anywhere, but I wanted to belong somewhere. So I got
Yeah.
into a lot of that, and I could have avoided a lot of it, but I didn't. And I got hurt. I got hurt a lot. I got hurt very, very, very much, too much. And it still comes up, but I'm talking about it now in therapy, about how unworthy I am, how undeserving I am of love, and having those doubts of, will I ever be with somebody who understands me, somebody who loves me, for who I am, who accepts me as I am, somebody who wants to stick around, somebody who wants to be committed, somebody who is responsible, and all those nice and good things. I do wonder at times that if I will ever have that, there's that other part of me that says, oh, you don't deserve it. You'll never have it. Nobody will ever love you. You're damaged goods. You're broken. You messed your life up. Who wants to introduce you to their family when you're like so broken and so messed up? That voice is there. That voice is there. That voice exists. But now there's another voice that's more powerful than that voice. And that voice is like, okay, girl, I see you. You are speaking from a position of pain. You are speaking from a position of your trauma, and you are the unhealed versions of me that are trying to protect me because you have experienced a lot of pain and you're trying to protect me from experiencing more pain. But in doing so, you are setting me up for failure and setting me up for more pain. So I see you, I see where you're coming from, but I am here now and you are safe with me. You do not need to be afraid. You do not have to project from a place of trauma. You can now just project from a place of healing, embrace that you have now grown from the circumstances, from the things that shaped you in life. It's your past, yes, but it's definitely not your present, and it's not your future either.